Hi guys, this is chapter 3, key issue 2. There was no video for key issue 1, so if you're noticing it skipped right to key issue 2 on the website, that is why. This time we're looking at internal migrations and Ravenstein's laws of migration, which is not in your book, so definitely when we get to that, you want to take really, really good notes. So first, we have two types of internal migration, and internal migration is migration that is happening within the country itself. You guys have looked at lots of international migrations, and your project is on mostly international migrations. There's two types of internal migration, interregional migration and intra-regional migration. Really confusing. Try to keep them straight. Key terms are really important. So interregional is migration to another region within the same country, and I'll give you some examples of that. And intra-regional is migration within the same region, okay? So most people would do something like if you buy a new house in town somewhere, most likely you're doing intra-regional migration. The trend tends to be, and not so much in the United States, but in most places in the world, rural to urban, meaning typically people move from like small towns or the countryside to urbanized locations, which is cities. So here's some examples of interregional movement. So this is a pretty famous example. After World War II, a lot of families were moving from the Rust Belt, which is these, let me get my pointer here, these green states right here, and moving into the Sun Belt, which is basically, it's called the Sun Belt because of the nice climate. It's sunny there. It's all of these states that are dark orange, and then the lighter orange too would be a lot of the other states that people were moving to, right? So Nevada is actually included in that. But Texas, California, and Florida were the most common states in the Sun Belt that these guys were moving to. Both of these, by the way, are on your region, the region part of your quiz for your next map quiz after October break, right? So here's the Rust Belt right here in green. Here is the Sun Belt in the oranges and dark reds. So what's different about when we get to Ravenstein, we'll learn that most migrants are not families, but in this case, most of the migrants were families, and it was after World War II, so there's all of this economic prosperity after World War II, which we'll talk about in a little bit. We've talked about it a little bit already because of the baby boom, right? This is when the baby boom is happening, and this is where most people are living. That's just a close-up right there of the Rust Belt area. So they call it the Rust Belt because this is where industry used to happen, right? Like we have some of these major industrial cities like Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, Buffalo, and after World War II especially, those industries start to dry up. So if you think about industry and the production of things like steel and metals getting old, think of rust. That's why they call it the Rust Belt. Okay, so people are moving from this region largely. Okay, and then we have intra-regional examples. So this is within the same region, right? So typically this happens with urbanization, where you're moving from a rural area to an urban area. Lots of people did this, especially right after industrialization, like in the 1890s, because factories were in the cities, so people tended to move in the cities in order to be close to work because there wasn't a lot of transportation options back then. So I'll come back to this in a second, but here's an example. This is Chicago in the 1890s. You can see industry is really booming. It's very, very crowded. Most likely many of those people are immigrants, and most likely many of them moved to Chicago recently. And then counter-urbanization is the opposite of urbanization. Counter-urbanization is when we have people moving from the cities to the suburbs. Okay, so this is also something that happens largely after World War II. So we have people moving to the Sun Belt and also people moving out to the suburbs. So I actually have a little video for you guys. So this was one of the famous suburbs that were built. It was built in New York. It was called Levittown. And these suburbs were built really, really rapidly. The houses were built really, really rapidly, and they were perfect for men who came home from the war, who had the GI Bill, so they had some money to buy a house. So they moved their families out to the suburbs where the schools were supposed to be better and things like that. If I always think about the opening scenes of Edward Scissorhands, if you guys have seen that, where all the houses are super cutesy and pastel colors and things like that. I always think about that. So I'm going to shut up while you guys watch this video. If the sound is kind of cruddy, it's because it's from the 1950s, so give me a break.
5 years ago, this was a vast checkerboard of potato farms on New York's Long Island. Today, a community of 60,000 persons living in 15,000 homes, all built by one firm. This is Levittown, one of the most remarkable housing developments ever conceived. The idea that came to a man named Bill Levitt was this: why not apply to the building of houses the same principles that have brought other American industries to their unexcelled peaks of efficiency and service? Why not mass produce the elements that go to make up a house, just as the auto industry does with the parts that go into a new car? Bill Levitt had some other ideas. Put kitchen and bathroom back to back and let them share the same plumbing. Let your plumbers do their work without interruption and without waiting for the carpenter or the bricklayer to get out of the way. Pre-cut your lumber so it's all ready to be assembled into the frame of a house. With the waste removed, one truck can deliver to the building site all the rough lumber that will go into 2 complete Levitt homes. It's really a matter of organization and planning, getting rid of waste motion. When the foundation is ready, coils for the radiant heating are there. Not a day too soon or a day too late. Without delay, the steam fitters finish their work and move on to the next house, and right behind them come the masons to lay the underflooring. Power-driven trowels make the job a lot easier and faster. Levittown houses are not prefabricated. Prefabrication means a factory operation in which large quantities of materials are kept moving to the workers. Here the opposite is true. The construction crews are moved to a waiting line of materials. This sort of organization and efficiency is all important in the vast defense housing program. That's the next order of business for the nation's home builders. The architecture of the houses in Levittown is varied enough to eliminate dreary monotony, while at the same time enough alike to permit the savings that result from standardization. Many housing projects are a sea of mud when it rains, but not this one. A wide range of color schemes also brings variety. So here's the home that cost its happy owners just $9,000. And that includes such extras as a completely equipped kitchen, a two-way fireplace, a finished room in the attic, and even a washing machine. The living room. Levittown is a community of young people, and that means a great need for schools. Space has been set aside for plenty of them. Dotted here and there throughout the huge area are shopping centers where every type of product or service is readily available. Shoe stores, five and dimes, department stores, supermarkets, and banks. In addition, there are other facilities designed to draw residents together to help make them feel they are part of a real community. Recreation centers with provisions for filling leisure hours, summer or winter. Yes, that old potato patch has come to a good end.
Okay. Let me get out of that and back to our, there we go. Okay, so things that I would want you to notice in that, the 1950s is a time of lots of mass consumption as well. Like, people are buying things. So I like that it talked about the dishwashers and all these new appliances that were in the house. Like, they're really building this new lifestyle. And a big part of that lifestyle was counter-urbanization, okay? So moving out to the suburbs. So keep that in mind. Good example of intra-regional migration. So the last thing, and I would definitely freeze frame this and write it down, these are Ravenstein's laws of migration. So Ravenstein studies migration, or did. He's probably dead. Sorry if you're not Mr. Ravenstein. But these are just things that are commonly true about migration. Now, of course, they aren't going to be true in every case, but these tend to be the common trends. So every migration flow generates a return or counter migration. That means every time that there is movement to an area, it often causes movement out of that same area, okay? So like a good example would be something like white flight, if you've heard of that before. It tends to be when there are people of different ethnicities and cultures that move into a predominantly white area. Oftentimes, and this is true in the United States, the white population will move out of that area into a new population. The 1950s, counter-urbanization is a good example of this. You may have noticed that there's a lot of white people in that video. It was mostly white families that were moving out, okay, as other ethnicities and migrants were moving into the places that they were at previously, okay? The majority of migrants move a short distance, right? So as I said, most of us, if we're moving, we tend to move in just a different house in the Reno-Sparks area, right? It's less likely that we are going to move to another state, and it is even less likely than that we are going to move to another country, okay? So most migrants will move short distances. Migrants who move longer distances tend to choose big city destinations, okay? Probably because there are more economic opportunities and occupation opportunities in big cities. Urban residents are often less migratory than inhabitants of rural areas, which makes sense because we've talked about the trends are that most people will move from rural areas to urbanized areas, not the other way around. Families are less likely to make international moves than young adults. Most migrants that are international migrants are young, single, and usually men, but that's not always the case, but usually they are young and they are single, okay? It's harder to move a family, right, into an international location. You don't need to pay attention to that last part right there. These are mostly the things that I want you to know. When we talk about refugees, however, which we are going to talk about a little bit more later, these don't always hold true. This is usually voluntary migration that we're talking about that follows these trends. Obviously, refugees, oftentimes those are families, but that's because they're moving because they have to, right? That's a forced migration. Okay, so that is it for today. I'm sorry we didn't get lots of Teddy Margie time. They are really busy off doing other things. But come back for Key Issue 3. Bye.